BCBAs from distant lands, friends of old, you have been summoned here to answer the call of behavior analytic research dissemination. The Earth stands upon the brink of destruction. None can escape it. Each behavior analyst is bound to the fate of us. In this one doom. Diana, bring forth the articles.
Here, they are a gift. A gift to the foes of anti-science. Why not replicate these articles? Give our graduate students this research. Let us use it against the ABA haters.
We cannot do all the research ourselves. None of us can. Effective experimentation and replication requires work from the whole field. Science has no single master.
And what would a Hallmark Christmas movie lover know of this matter?
This is no mere Hallmark Christmas movie lover. She is Jackie, professor at Regis College.
Sit down, special guest and book club guy Alan Haberman.
Jackie is right. We cannot think only of our own research labs. We have only one choice. The research must be disseminated.
Then what are we waiting for? Let's talk about it at a local coffee shop.
These articles cannot simply be shared by a few of us in comfy chairs. The articles must be disseminated by the files of a weekly podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week a topic is discussed, including weeks where mystical articles are picked by the host with no particular theme other than what they think will be fun to talk about.
One does not simply make a behavior analytic podcast. Not with 10,000 BCBAs could you do this. It is folly.
I will host the podcast, though I do not know the research.
I will help you bear this burden, Robert Perry Cruz.
If by my life or death I can disseminate this research, I will.
Rob, Jackie, and Diana aren't going anywhere without me. You need people with book club level context on this sort of mission, quest, podcast.
So be it. 4 hosts. You shall be the Fellowship of the Inside Track. Ooh, and your music. Hey, everybody. We hope you enjoyed our special introduction to this week's episode of ABA Inside Track, the podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research. Why such a big introduction, you might ask?
Why? Yes, please tell me,
Well,
Robert Perry Cruz.
Because this is a special episode. 'Tis a grab bag episode, which Diana wants to call... This is before the bit. What did you want to call it, Diana?
I wanted to call it Grab Bo Baggins.
Grab Bo Baggins. Yes.
Here we are.
And so here we are.
Beginning of our quest.
The beginning of our quest. Yes, so for new listeners, you were confused for a good 4 minutes while we did our fun introduction. This is not a Lord of the Rings podcast. Surprise. It's a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, of course. And we are joined with myself. We have Diana and Jackie. And as you heard from our dramatic introduction, Alan is here.
It's all my token
here.
stuff.
I've never even
on
seen
hand,
that movie.
within arm's reach. You got it. Nice.
I've got it so far that I've never even seen it.
I resent being given Pippin's line.
I was going to have you do "and my axe," but it A, didn't seem appropriate to the content of the podcast, and then B, it didn't seg as well into the line. So we'll do it again sometime, I'm sure. This was so much fun. We all had such a good time. Well, this is a grab bag episode, so if you're a regular listener to the podcast, we hope you enjoyed a slightly different, I think it's the first different opening we've had in 250 plus episodes of this show. So fun treat. And for longtime listeners, occasionally we'll pull out these grab bags where we sort of just all pick different articles. And based on the name and based on the fact that we have Alan joining us this grab bag episode, this Grab Bo Baggins episode, I thought we should probably add a little extra spice to it. So fun introduction. So unlike most grab bags where we just have a giant bag where we printed out all the articles, it's very ecologically wasteful, then we randomly pull it out and then we discuss it. This time we have them already. They've been brought to us by a bunch of hobbits. They brought them to us, but as you know from the introduction of the podcast, we must disseminate them, and we can't do that anywhere. We must go to the fires of Mount Doom, where there's a really great podcast studio that will edit and distribute this podcast for all to hear the dissemination.
Thanks, Dan.
It's Dan, yes. I should have called it Mount Dan. Oh, I don't know if you would have appreciated or cared, but Mount Dan, that's where we're going.
Okay.
So we've got 4 articles. So we're going to begin our quest to Mount Dan / Mount Doom. And who would like to go? Who would like to go first on the quest? Who is the bravest among us? Shall it be me? It'll be me. I am so brave. Okay. I played 2 parts in the opening, in case you could not tell.
I could tell.
Could you tell?
Yeah.
I thought my Elijah was really spot on. No, that is not mine. So my article.
You want me to read these?
No, let's just do it. We'll do it one at a time.
Oh, okay.
A little different than normal, so nobody knows what's coming up next. Could we do another Lord of the Rings bit? Who knows? Maybe. So here we are. We're walking along. You know, I don't know what our party order is or anything like that. And here we are. Oh, we're in the Dwarven Mines. And look, it's time to review this article together as a group, maybe around a campfire. I'm really going with this bit.
I think, probably it should be Rob, Jackie, Diana, Alan.
That sounds good.
Right.
Okay.
I would like to be in the middle of the group.
That's in
for
terms
protection.
I thought in terms of sharing the articles or in terms of the party order in case of combat.
D&D rules.
Okay. What's your class? You got to be in the middle.
I'm small but mighty.
Okay. All right. Well, my article, I was so inspired by our episode on direct instruction that I originally had prepared this for the direct instruction episode, but it did not seem to fit in what we were trying to do with that, which was sort of give like a nice overview of the components of direct instruction. But I thought it was such an interesting article because it's not the kind of article you see very often. So I wanted to bring it back, and I thought Grab Bag was the best place to do it.
Grab Bag.
And it is from Behavior Analysis and Practice 2021. It is in his own words. Siegfried Zig Engelman talks about what's wrong with education and how to fix it by Heward, Kimball, Heckerman, and Dunn. And this is an article that is not actually an research article. It is a transcript of a lecture or kind of a Q&A that Zig Engelman had done for Ohio State University's teleconference seminar on applied behavior analysis back in 1992. And so it was put here in the special issue in BAP on direct instruction. But I think it covers some of the same issues that we talked about in that episode. But I think it goes a little bit more into some of the bigger barriers to the use of direct instructions. I think one of the questions we came out of that episode having was, this all seems like it has a lot of research. This all seems very interesting. It doesn't seem like something you're just going to pick up and do as a behavior analyst. But it does seem like something an educator might be interested in. So where's the follow through? Where's the interest? And so I thought this article gave a little bit more context there. Now, again, it's from the man who created direct instruction, so there's going to be a bias there, certainly. But I have found it to be sort of humorous to sort of hear someone talk about some of these issues in a journal, because usually you don't get Q&A interview transcripts in our journal. So it's kind of a neat change.
Look, it's set up like a play as well.
Yes, there's a script. Most of it is it's either Bill Heward or Siegfried Engelman talking.
How fun.
I think if you're a graduate student looking for a really fun thesis, you could put on a 2-man production. It's like Glengarry Glen Ross, but about direct instruction or behavior analysis. It'll be tons of fun. Yep. No. Okay.
I don't know if you're going to get a thesis out of that project, but you might get some. You might score some points.
All right. So here are some of the big points from this, because it's not really a research article in the sense that this is more just reminiscences of Zig Engelman. So for those who didn't hear that episode or don't remember what direct instruction is, it is a teaching system that uses the analysis of content that you are trying to teach students, and then it selects and sequences various examples to set up examples and non-examples of the content being taught. It focuses on communication between the teacher and student with high rates of active student responding, high rates of reinforcement for correct answers, corrective feedback for incorrect answers, with a goal of practice to mastery, and then a review of the content because the learner is always right. And so some of the kind of key points in this article, it kind of starts off with Zig Engelman. He was one of the two, or one of the many people who've been involved in direct instruction, but it's sort of, the kernel of his idea. And he's been involved and had been involved before his passing in most of that initial research and most of the publications at the time. Just to give you a sense of what his general thesis in this article is, at the time of this interview, he had just published a book, War Against the School's Academic Child Abuse. So
how does he really feel? How does he really feel?
I want a title that tells me what the thesis is right off the bat.
A strong stance.
It's like schools, okay, not okay, question mark. Like, you're not telling me anything, book. I don't want to buy you. So this starts with sort of a little career retrospective with Engelman talking about the fact he started off his career doing ads for children. And he became very interested in how do kids pay attention to information? What information do they learn? How much do you need to repeat the sort of tagline or about the product to get them interested? And then sort of from those kind of mini experiments he did in that trade, he moved into a career in teaching and then went and joined the Institute for Research on Exceptional Children in the University of Illinois, and then has done all his publications on direct instruction since then. But some of the things that I found interesting in this, and again, I do love within reason, I do love a good grinds my gears article or discussion. And this is definitely putting a lot of people on blast. Who does Siegfried Engelman put on blast? Well, people who fund the systems of education for not having the educational literacy to understand what it is they're funding. School administrators he puts on blast because he sees them as just sort of like they come in, they do whatever they're going to do. It's not really linked to whatever the students are doing or the teachers are doing. They just kind of can do whatever. If they have an idea, they put it into play. Kind of we all know what that's like when someone new comes in and they have their ideas and you sort of keep your head down until they go away. The ed publishers he puts on blast as people who just sort of publish books without a lot of research supporting them. And then they get people to buy them. And they are a real economic barrier for a lot of educational change in many ways. He does not
like the academic publishing system, though, in our country.
What is that? Is that bad too?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't read that blast article. I only time for one in this episode. He blasts media. He blasts the media and sees media as probably should be more interested in looking at why is education not working or how is education not working. He sees them only really caring about controversy in education or when there's an interesting story about like this teacher is doing a thing and they don't actually then follow up on did the thing work? Did the thing get better results with education or teaching? They just go get a bunch of B-roll of kids smiling and stuff and they put together either a feel-good story or someone got in trouble at school and then they're putting together here's how this person got in trouble at school stories. Or they're looking at people who come in and they're like, I'm going to disrupt education. At the time, I know disruption seems like one of those things that like was invented in the 2010s with the advent of technology. But apparently at the time of this interview, there was a group called the New American Schools Development Corporation that was purportedly going to come in and disrupt education. They were going to do schools differently. They were going to control all aspects of education. They were going to do experiments and find what works, and what worked was going to be what was part of the schools. And they were going to think about how did the school fit in the neighborhood and what was relevant to them. All these things that sound really good, but as Engelman points out, is mostly run by people who have absolutely no experience educating children. They're just people who think if they can just motivate kids enough or they can show they care enough, that will somehow be a change in education. And I have some more. I have a footnote on that if I still have time on whatever happened to the New American Schools Development Corporation, because I was very interested. But again, blast any group that thinks they're just going to fix education without actually going to schools that are failing, watching how the kids are learning or not learning, asking them questions about what they have or have not learned, and seeing firsthand what is or is not working in our school systems. He doesn't exactly blast free market as hurting education, but he also blasts anyone who thinks if only we could put education into the free market system, that would somehow solve all the problems related to education. Because again, most of the people who would be in charge of that would not actually know how to then teach relevant skills. And then he also, who else does he like to blast? There's a lot of people he's blasting.
You know what phrase I hate?
What?
E-blast. Isn't that just like terrible?
I guess. Is this an e-blast though? Because he's doing it over the phone.
No, it's the previous version.
Okay. No.
It's just where my head's at.
I'm sorry.
Let's use lambast. That's a little bit nicer.
Okay, who else does he lambast? He lambasts developmental psychologists or anyone who not the idea of developmental psychology as a global view of how humans tend to develop over time, based on biology and based on environmental variables, but in terms of how does one do education, seeing it as, well, you need to be studying things like readiness for things, or because most children at age blank do skill X, therefore, everyone needs to learn that, rather than actually paying attention to individual learners who can do what, who can't do what, why might they not be able to do that. And some of the circular logic that comes from a lot of developmental theories of education, of the idea of like, well, they'll learn this skill when they're ready. Well, how will they know when they're ready? Well, they'll show us that they're ready. Okay, but how will they show us that they're ready? Because they'll be ready. It's that sense of we'll just keep kind of waiting for the kids to just sort of spontaneously learn knowledge about, related to sort of the academic field. So it puts a lot of people on blast. He does not put on blast, however, actual teachers, which I thought was interesting because, we usually think of education, we think, well, the teachers are failing. But as the way he sees it is, teachers should not be responsible. So there was a question about should teacher pay be linked to how well their students do? And he said that would be ridiculous. It wouldn't solve the problem because most teachers are doing things that they are required to do by the laws of their states, by the school administrator who he just said these people don't necessarily know what they're doing all the time. So that's not a good metric, because if you just blame the teachers for not teaching well, giving bad tools, it's not really going to solve any problems, because teachers have to teach what they are told that they have to teach. If they were told you have to teach using direct instruction methods, then most of them would learn direct instruction methods. They would use direct instruction methods. Hopefully they'd like direct instruction methods. We'd see results from direct instruction methods or not, but hopefully we would. But they don't really have that leeway in terms of how do they choose the curriculum, how do they choose the medium, how do they choose the format of teaching. So they are left, yeah, and blameless isn't quite the word, but they are seen as sort of not being able to exert any sort of control over education in the ways that would be meaningful to
unblasted.
People. They're unblasted. He doesn't quite blast parents and community members.
It's so bad.
But he does speak to the idea that it's shocking not shocking, but that most people who have children in our school systems don't actually have the requisite knowledge or academic literacy to understand why things are or are not going well. At this point, he didn't go too much into, because I think it certainly is very hard for parents. Like, as a parent, if I had to go to the trouble of learning about what was good and what wasn't good instruction, I'd probably say, I might as well just teach my kid at home if I had to do this amount of research. And that's not really feasible. So I think it's more that idea of how could we get a little bit more literacy about what is good or not good academic instruction out in the communities, so that communities could see whether their school is or is not using what would be considered good practice when it comes to education. And when it comes down to it, he's, very much like we talked about in direct instruction. The learner is always right. And if you don't know what you're teaching and you're not sequencing it in meaningful ways, and you don't know how you are teaching or what results you expect to get from your teaching, you are going to be shocked and appalled when children fail to learn. But our systems aren't set up to then use that information to say, okay, I didn't do it right, I need to go back and teach again. They're set up to say, nope, everyone's got to stay in the same group, even though we are often not heterogeneous learners, and we're just going to keep going on. And how inequitable that practice is. We talked about that a little bit in the episode, in that it just increasingly leaves children who aren't being taught effectively, just keeps leaving them behind. It also then keeps leaving students who are moving ahead or advance, leaves them behind, not to the same extent, but because now a lot of time is being spent on resolving problems that crop up when children are in environments where they're not able to learn effectively, where they're feeling frustrated at how they're not able to learn effectively, when teachers are trying to teach a little bit slower to help out, but they're not really hitting at what was not taught in the first place. He believes a lot of barriers certainly are the economics of teaching and education, the press, the publication industry, who's sending books, certainly the way administrators are trained. He puts blame there. He puts blame on kind of developmentalists for popularizing the idea of teaching shouldn't be about what kids can't do. It should be more about all their strengths or using their strengths. However, it's great to want to use the strengths of a learner. He doesn't get into this too much, but that idea of caring about environments and caring about the context in which kids learn, I think is very important. He doesn't touch on it, but at the same time, if all you're doing is trying to create warm comfortable environments for learning to occur. That's like a prerequisite. If you then don't teach anything meaningfully or know what your instruction is going to be, it doesn't matter how nice the environment is or how happy everyone is in that environment. They can't learn if they are not taught. And there are certain ways things can or can't be taught. And a lot of it goes beyond just, I'm sharing information. He gives a good example of a lot of teaching is just tradition. So fractions. How do we learn fractions? Well, we do fraction after fraction after fraction, where you have 1/4, 1/2, and then you color in the picture.
Every time I learned about fractions, I ate a whole pizza.
You eat the whole thing?
Yeah.
And
in various segments. Oh. Exactly. And then I had to order another pizza.
It's very expensive. It's a real barrier
but
to learning.
Worthwhile.
But then when you ask students about, well, what would be a fraction greater than a whole, they didn't know how to do that, because as far as they understood it, fractions always have a 1 on the top and a number on the bottom. And the number on the bottom is what is relevant. The 1 on the top is irrelevant. That's just what a fraction looks like. And how
it only adds up to 1 pizza.
Yeah. And how if you taught them to pay attention to a numerator and denominator, they would generate more information about fractions. They'd be able to do more advanced fractions faster, versus they were taught the wrong thing. And then you have to stop and say, hold on, everything you learned is not exactly right. We got to go back and reteach the lesson so that you understand that you can have a 2 or a 3 or a 4 or whatever number on the top of the fraction, and it still is a fraction. It's still a number. It might be greater than 1, So he brings up Project Follow-Through, which we touched on a little bit in the episode, but the idea that a lot of the research on what constitutes good teaching was done back in the 60s, and surprisingly no one seemed to care. And, puts kind of society as a whole on blast to wrap it up, saying that we live in an anti-intellectual culture. This is in 1992. I think many of us might say we still kind of live in an anti-intellectual culture. But specifically that doesn't like behaviorists, even though they're looking at what people are currently able to do and trying to support them in getting to a place that they would like to be. I mean, even back then in the 90s, it seemed like that was not seen as a popular opinion. And he also sees the system as not liking a lot of what direct instruction espouses, because it's all about work. It's all about setting up criterion referencing, and it's all about analyzing data to support something did or did not happen the way we expected. So sort of implying that most people would rather just, I did the thing, and then I kept doing more things, and who really cares about the results? At some point, we'll do a test and we'll know. And at that point, we'll blame somebody else. And a little quote at the end, it's a hell of a lot worse out there than any of the data would ever suggest. So Zig Engelman was not a happy camper. So those are so just a quick summary of some of the gears that got ground in this article. And that left me with a couple questions, which really kind of related to, are things better now in 2020? When does this come out? 2024?
No, this is...
It comes out in January.
Oh, you're right.
It's 2024.
Oh my gosh.
It's 2024.
Jackie, your first chance to do the intro.
You missed it.
I know, and Rob ruined it, but that's fine. It's fine.
We did a fun bit.
I'll take the bit over me saying it. It's okay.
I'll make a bit every podcast. I swear. I swear by my father's blade. Our school's better now than they were when Zig Engelman was grinding gears on this call. And I definitely could see some areas they are better in. Certainly there's a bigger focus on data, though I don't know if it is always on the most relevant data or if there's necessarily the right amount of guidance as to how to then use that data. Because again, if teachers take data saying, hey, this curriculum that the district has purchased for thousands and thousands of dollars is not effectively teaching kids, is the district then going to say, wow, thanks for telling us, next year we're going to get different curricula? Or are they going to say, yikes, well, looks like you better teach it better? Or I mean, like, what's going to happen there? I'm not saying that is what they're going to say. I just, that kind of feels like one of those problems that when you're faced with, it's like, look, sir, this is all terrible. Should we spend more thousands of dollars on something else? It's like, probably not. I think we're stuck with this, so make the best of it.
There was a recent, I can't remember now if it was Freakonomics, Rob, where they talked about in whole word reading or sight word reading.
Yep.
And how after implementing it nationwide for 20 plus years, they've realized that it's actually not very effective.
Yep, that's true. They knew that.
Was that a Freakonomics?
That's, I've read that in a lot of places.
That is an entire podcast called Sold a Story that Matt Jacoria asked us to listen to last year.
Oh, that's right. Matt brought it up. Yeah.
This is not what I listened to.
Oh.
It might have been Freakonomics. It might have been Radiolab because those two hosts sound a lot alike. But anyway, it was very informative. But I feel like our kids, their teachers this year have said, like, we are changing how we're teaching reading, and it has been a more phonics-based approach.
To which I said, I stood up and I threw the report they gave me right in their face, and I said, they've known this since the late 60s, and you're just doing it.
It was
this
really
year.
helpful.
I'm really angry.
It really endears.
You know what grinds my gears? Much like Zig Engelman, I said. And they said, oh, Zig Engelman? They didn't, no, I did not do that, folks. Come on.
But anyway, things can change, but you're right. Like once that momentum is established, it's really hard. Speaking of grinding gears, you got to grind it to a halt and change directions and buy all new curricula and retrain all your teachers. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But it is important to follow the data.
Yeah. Another place I see a lot more focus on data is in the use of like social emotional learning, which I feel like would be one of those things that if you talked about it with Zig Engelman on this call, he'd be like, that sounds like the biggest waste of everybody's time. Why are we doing it? And I would both agree and disagree with him on some of that. I do think there needs to be more of a focus on the climate and the cultures that we create around schools and the level of inclusivity and diversity and equity that we put into our schools. And I do think schools need to be a place people feel safe and welcomed and that their ideas are appreciated. However, I see it as being one part of the whole, much like a fraction, which can go over one, in that if you have safe environments, you can do good teaching. But if you don't have good, I don't want to say teaching, good curriculum, but if you don't have good curricula, then it doesn't matter how safe the environment is, you're not able to reach meaningful goals for students. And then finally, my question was, did Zig Engelman, he did all this great stuff, but when he died, do you think he was like really sad at like, man, I did all this work and I supported all these lines of research and I have all this great data and it kind of feels like almost nobody cares? Do you think that was like upsetting? I don't want to read anyone's mind too much, but that seems frustrating. Like just reading about him, I feel frustrated for him.
I definitely feel frustrated for him, but I can't say how he felt.
I don't know.
So I don't know.
Hopefully
the article reads
frustrated,
like
but not so frustrated.
Very frustrated.
Yeah.
Hopefully he had other, wins in his life.
And finally, if you were wondering what happened in the New American Schools Development Corporation,
Is that the NASDAQ?
I did know it's the group he was saying. This group's probably not going to
get it. NASDC, the NASDAQ.
Oh, it's okay. Good job. I did find an article by Chester Finn Jr. from the Thomas Fordham Institute, who wrote about how it sort of like kind of worked, it kind of didn't. It's one of those things of it kind of worked in small doses. They could never scale it. Now it's some other corporation that does something related to money and education. So we're back where we started, it seems. Anyway, that was my grab bag article. I'm so happy to have shared it because I do love to grind some gears occasionally. Anyway, what a fun time we've had. Let's move through this mine, everybody. That's enough. We've ground our gears through the mine. It's time to move along. Now we're in mountains. We're in the misty mountains.
Well, my article won't grind
Won't
anyone's
you like
gears.
knowing? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
It's not. I just wanted to say, isn't it great to know that Led Zeppelin were such nerds that they made so many references to Lord of the Rings in their songs?
It was a very popular book back around the time that they were writing their songs.
They were nerds, though. Big nerds. Okay, go ahead, Jackie.
Okay, so my article was published in 2023, and it is entitled Prompting and Modeling of Coping Strategies During Childbirth. And this was published in Behavior Analysis and Practice. And it is awesome that there is something that's like so very far away from where, like, I never thought that I would read an article about childbirth in Behavior Analysis and Practice. But I do want to point out that the author and the research assistant were trained doulas.
Okay.
So I'm like trying to figure out, I guess they probably have a master's degree because it says the authors thanks their graduate school advisor for supporting them in this research and allowing them the opportunity to apply behavior analysis in a non-traditional setting. And then they say that they're trained doulas in the footnote, but they don't have it. I just think it's fascinating. So are they a behavior analyst and a doula at the same time? Like, how cool is that? But anyway, I bet at some point they will be. So I just love that this is it's behavior analytic in nature, and they took so much data, but they're trying to apply behavior analysis outside the field. So they are.
Sorry, Jackie. I want to go back to that. So they were behavior analysts who then became doulas?
I think they're doulas that then are becoming behavior analysts.
Oh.
Because when they did the study, when Ashley conducted this study, Ashley was a trained doula as well as the research assistant was, and it's in the footnotes. But in the thank you in the thank you of the article, they thank their advisor for allowing them to conduct behavior analysis in a non-traditional research setting.
Cool.
So they were interested, and then okay, good. I just think back to some of our talks about like expanding behavior analysis to new fields.
Greenwald, if you can reach out to us and let us know.
Yeah, what was your path here? This is fascinating stuff.
I know. So childbirth typically occurs in the hospital with the aid of medicine for pain relief and decreased duration of labor. They suggested that over 80% of people that are engaged in childbirth get an epidural, but over 50% of those people do not actually want medicine, but they end up actually using it anyway. So they might go in and say, I don't want an epidural, over 50%, but then end up getting one.
Or 50% of the people that say they don't want medicine end up using it.
Yep. So this preference for not using medicine, but the current strategies in place seem to be misaligned, right? Because it is common that medicine will be prescribed during childbirth. And so the author in the introduction states that it's common for laboring people to lay down and be stationary during childbirth, but this is actually not ideal for birth outcomes, which I did not know. It actually makes... If you stand up and walk around, it actually will short the first stage of labor by over an hour, research suggests. So you should be moving around.
I remember that at one of the trainings, like the childbirth trainings we did before our first child was born, where they're showing the pictures of like, you could stand like this, you could stand like that. And all I could think is, I am so glad that I do not have to go through it, because that just seems like, it's like, what's the best that can happen in this excruciating pain? Well, you could squat down or stand up for a bit or sit in a chair or on a ball or something.
These are all the things that they're going to take data on. So that's pretty awesome that you know them. The World Health Organization.
A lot of use it was for me.
Yeah. It would be. So they took data on support partners as well. So putting it out there. The World Health Organization suggested that preference should be on non-medical methods, such as changing positions, different types of breathing methods, massage, hot baths, etc., instead of using any sort of medicine during childbirth. And these coping strategies are typically discussed, like you said, Rob, during childbirth classes. But childbirth classes may not be available to everyone. And you just watched these coping strategies probably on a video. They talked about it, right? You didn't have to engage in those skills until mastery, right? And there's probably limited generalization, because when you're in that childbirth class, it's very different than when you're in labor, right? So the author...
How so, Jackie? Tell us more.
Lots of things, right? So to address these concerns, the author created a behavioral application called Stork Assist to provide a treatment package to demonstrate these labor coping strategies in the moment, which is pretty cool, right?
Brand that first. That's good stuff.
So just so you know, in the funding, no funding was received for conducting or publishing the study, but after concluding the study, the author independently pursued and received a copyright and patent on the software Stork Assist. So, cool.
Nice.
Right? Like, go you, Ashley. Like, really killing it. So, they developed this. To develop this application, and included in vivo prompting and video modeling. And if you had those in the moment in those early and late stages of labor, could it, number one, make everybody feel better? And number two, could it reduce the use of medicine? Right? And this seems like a really difficult study to conduct. Right? Whew. And it seems like it was, but because they're already doulas, I feel way better about it than when I did not know that, when I didn't read the footnote that she was a doula. I'm like, wow, she is very brave. So 12 participants were in this study. They were separated into 6 dyads, the laboring person and the support person. The only requirement is that they had to have a healthy pregnancy and could not already have a doula, right? Because then the doula could interfere with using the app. So that's kind of amazing that's how they found someone. It makes a lot more sense now. They probably had I don't want to assume her gender. They probably had like some participant pools, right? Already being a doula. And so the laboring participants identified as female and were the ages between 27 and 42. I almost said 72. That would have been like the oldest woman ever.
It's a real outlier in the study.
So 4 was their first time, and 2 was they had multiple babies prior to this. And the support persons had varying unknown ages, but they all identified as male. One thing I love about this is while I was reading this article, I was like, they know so much about, they use like the technical terms of like first time or multiple time. I'm like, they know so much about childbirth. And now I know why, because they're a doula.
Right.
But before that, I was like, they did so much research for this. They're so
They
technical.
must have read what to expect when you're expecting like
Right?
7 times.
So many times.
But they forgot to get the support person's age. They're like, damn it.
I know, right? All the participants received medical guidance that their labor could start at home, and they only had to go into the hospital, or they could have their baby at home if they chose to during those later stages. And so this is the crazy part, but I guess it's not crazy if you're a doula. The baseline and treatment began in the home before they went to the hospital. So when the contractions were, I think, an hour apart, the participants called the researcher and the research assistant, but now they're doulas, and they would come over to their house and observe them for 2 hours maximum. And so then they said, don't worry, the researcher will not interact with you while they're there. They're just going to be videotaping you and observing you. So these participants are like the best, because I can't even imagine someone videotaping me and then being like not talking to me, but just like for 2 hours while I'm actively in labor, like early stages of labor, but some of them late stages of labor, but actively in labor. Right?
What was the informed consent on that process, man?
We're
just going to watch you. Too. It's going to be really weird.
So they actually did informed consent before this. So they met with the dyads before they actively went into labor. I
would hope so.
Consent. Right.
I don't think it's informed consent if you're like, so you're in labor. I need you to do the following things. Just say yes, please.
Yes. So no, way before then they met with them. They showed them the Stork Assist application on an iPad. They told them that they were going to come. They told them that, it's only going to be 2 hours. It's not going to be more. And
only 2 hours of labor. Don't worry about it.
I know, it's so much. And they did specify that the interval length would only be contractions. So from the start of one contraction until the end of the contraction, that is the interval length that they're taking data in, which is very clever.
But it sounds like they were dyads that were interested in
helping out.
Non kind of, the standard epidural type of pregnancy, probably to begin with. Yep. So they had a vested interest in sort of going through this process to some extent. Maybe not with someone videotaping me for 2 hours part of it as much, but okay.
So once they started labor, they called the researcher. Then the researcher came and determined if it was early labor or active labor. And now I know that they could determine that because they were actual doulas. Right before, I was like, how do they even know that? So that's good. So baseline was 5 to 15 contractions, and they used partial interval recording during that. And they just took data on the support person's behaviors and the behaviors of the birthing woman. And so that's kind of crazy. But I should back up for a minute, because they talk about on the app iPad itself, they show you little videos. They have a tutorial that's about 8 pages in length on how to use it. They also have a setup page that you add information related to your dilation, your effacement, and your station. I guess those all have to do with the baby. They didn't actually specify those, but I had a baby, so I know. And what resources you have available to you at your house. Yeah. Like, do you have a bathtub?
It has to do with your cervix and how thin it is and how open it is and where the baby is going up and down.
Right. So they have that. You can add it in, and based on this information, like what you have available, do you have a bathtub? Do you have a ball? Do you have a hot, cold pack? Any special conditions that you have? Then on the setup page, when you go, it will give you some options. So there's also a researcher page that the researcher go in and change the prompt levels and change everything out depending. But then what you would do, so for baseline, they just let them have contractions, 5 to 15, and just look to see what the support person was doing and what the person that was having labor contractions was doing. And then as soon as the predetermined baseline set finished, then they were asked to select a challenge. So some of the challenge included, are you feeling fear, stress, or panic? Are you feeling exhaustion? Do you feel like the baby's in a bad position? Do you have pain? Do you think they're progressing too quickly or not progressing? So the laboring person would choose one, and then it would automatically move to a screen where they were directed into a specific position to help alleviate one of those challenges. So there was usually 2 to 6 positions that they could choose from. They had both words and pictures to help demonstrate what that position looked like. And then you could also select up to 6 partner support behaviors to help in that specific position. So could the position...
One of them shut the hell up.
Well, one of them actually is do not touch. It's like a hand with a huge like arrow around it. But the other ones were like different massage, like different points on your hip that you could move, like a
thank you.
massage. But the one of my favorite is like do not touch.
Ever again.
Ever again. You've done this. Right? And so once they chose the laboring person's position and the support person, then they showed a video on what that looked like together. So once you did that, once the contractions started, you navigated to the contractions page, you hit start, and then whatever you just chose as your challenge, the video would show during your contraction. If you didn't choose anything on that previous page, then you just had 4 seconds of breathing videos. And then once the contraction ended, you clicked the end and then decided if you wanted to use that again or if you wanted to go back and pick a new challenge. So that's kind of crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. And really at the intervention, all they did was they gave the app and said to use as much as they want across the 2 hours. They used partial interval recording. They were given social validity questionnaire after the birth about the app and also about the birth outcome. So did you like using the app? Would you use the app again? Did you think it helped you? And did you use medicine during your birthing process when you got to the hospital? They used a non-concurrent multiple baseline design across participants, and 3 dyads were in early labor, 3 dyads were in active late labor. I just can't believe that the sessions were video recorded. I just can't imagine that anyone would want that. But they did. So they said yes, right? And the experimenter did not interact with the participant for the 2 hours that they were there. They just stood in the corner creepily videotaping. I don't know if it was creepy, but it sounds creepy.
Procedural integrity easy.
Yes, it does. Yep. So data were collected on productive, which is all these different behaviors like movement, breathing, and vocal movements, and non-productive behavior. But non-productive behaviors were really observed. And they said, for example, screaming. Screaming is non-productive. Mm-hmm. But they said during this time they were rarely observed. So that's fascinating. So data were collected on position, body movement, vocalization, and the support person's movements and vocalization. They also collected data on variability. If you changed up after each contraction, what you did, because data suggests that's helpful in the birthing process. The IOA was pretty good. They had some low ranges, but overall really great. And you'll get a kick out of this. So treatment fidelity was measured at 100% for everything, except for one support partner who was sleeping throughout the entire labor process.
Ooh, that's a deal breaker, ladies.
Oh, no. No.
Isn't that amazing? When I read that, I was like, ooh, maybe they wanted them to be sleeping or maybe they did not want them
to be sleeping. It's like their 10th kid. It's yeah. You got
Right.
this. You got this.
So what's really fascinating is their graphs. So their graphs are kind of the coolest graphs that I have seen. It is the multiple baseline is a line graph, but then underneath it they have a scatter plot graph to show the variability and what the participants were doing across the different baseline interventions. So they have the participant and the partner behaviors scored, as well as if they didn't engage in the behavior. And what's fascinating is that for all of the participants, I guess for the first 2 participants in early labor, they only were sitting. They did not change any of their movements whatsoever. And the support partner did nothing through at least 8 or 10 baseline sessions. But as soon as they started using the Stork app, you saw variability across participant behaviors, and then you saw some emerging support partner behavior, which is really nice that they were helping out. And for one of the participants, you see the support partner trying to do something the whole time. And then when the stork app came, they tried to do tons of stuff. They were like, wow, we're going to do everything for you. So that was really fun. You see less data in the active labor, right? Because they just have less time because they're going to have their baby. So they have to get to the hospital. But you see kind of the same thing is that for most participants, once you see that stork app, they are engaging in a variety of different movements and a variety of different. So the movements could be sit, stand, kneel, squat, lay, sway, lean, have a ball, go for a walk, deep breath. The partner behaviors are using a hip squeeze, counter pressure, massage, position support, encouragement, explanation, and praise. So I just think that's so fascinating how they graph these results. It really shows really well that, that once they had implemented the stork app, that their partners were helping, which is nice, and that they saw some variability in data. And so, which is good, right here, you want variability. So the results were that 5 of the 6 participants completed the post-delivery survey. All of the participants engaged in more behaviors, more of the coping strategies following the intervention. And of the responding participants, 3 indicated that they had an unmedicated child at birth. 2 reported using an epidural analgesia. I don't know what that is.
Analgesia.
Yep, during labor. And 1 reported using both intravenous and the epidural during labor. 1 reported having a cesarean delivery, and 4 reported having a normal delivery. Surprisingly, also, 5 of 6 of them brought the app with them.
Was the cesarean unmedicated?
Yeah, no, I don't.
I'm assuming that was one of the ones with multiple forms of analgesia.
Yeah, that makes sense, actually. Didn't even think about that.
If I remember correctly.
5 of 6 of them brought the app with them to the hospital, even though they didn't have to. So the study ended after that 2 hours when they went to the hospital, but the researcher said you can take this if you felt like it was helpful to the hospital, and 5 out of 6 of them actually took the app with them when they went to the hospital. With the social validity, they did say that they liked the app. They thought that it was helpful. It helped them reminded them the different movements that they could do. However, some said that they would never use it again. And the author posited that it was a pilot, so it looked pretty rough, right? They could have done.
Well, many people feel like they would never have a baby again as well.
Right.
So
yeah,
that's true.
So there it is. We use some prompting and video modeling to improve coping strategies during childbirth.
Okay. Very nice.
Awesome.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
All right, well, we've been on this quest for so long. Let's stop into the Prancing Pony and take a little break so we can remind all our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. And by listening to this episode, you're able to earn 1 learning CE. All you need to do is finish the quest with us. You have to make it to the end. If goblins kill you along the way, you can't get CEs for this episode. I'm so sorry. And then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, or click the link in our show notes or the show notes on your podcast player, and enter in some key information, including the first of our secret code words, which is second, SECOND. It's a measure of time. It's also a way to describe sort of the temporal placement of things, or potentially discussing our command or our party order, so we are not eaten by wargs. You know, we got to have a good party order. Who's first, who's second.
Yeah.
That's our code word, second.
Great.
All right, I hope everyone got enough ale and mutton or whatever. Here, we need to move on. Move on to our next location. Where are we now? We are in an ancient city beset by orcs. So Diana,
no.
go fast. we don't have so much time. We're getting shot at by arrows.
Well, the topic that I have is the perfect one to offset a siege of orcs because it's about interior decorating.
Oh, good. This Minas Tirith is going to need some help after this siege.
Okay, this article is by Sheehan, published in 2022, and it's titled "The Development of a Participatory Tool to Enable Autistic People to Influence the Interior Design of Their Homes." And it was published in Good Autism Practice, which is a journal I think I've referenced before. I like to check it out every now and again. It's really not a behavioral journal. It does not present single case design research, generally speaking, but it often brings up some really good and interesting points that I think we as folks who often work in this field with autistic clients should consider. So this article is more like a jumping off point for maybe future research if anyone out there is interested in this topic or type of topic. So our author wanted us to start things off by thinking about the fact that there's not a lot of research out there in identifying just any type of research, identifying appropriate or best practice living spaces for autistic adults. And this might be something that could actually be really important, right? Like we all are influenced by the environments in which we live, and having those environments be comfortable, soothing, suited to our needs, practical, and to our own individual tastes can make a huge difference in our overall outlook and how well we can really utilize that space. So there are a lot of factors that go into one's own living space, including the design of it, the type of textiles and fabrics that are used, the color, the acoustics, the lighting, and the layout of the furniture. And these are often not things that folks get a chance to have input on, what they would really like that space to look like. A couple people have done research or thought pieces in these areas. So Mostafa was one of those. They developed 7 design criteria that included thinking about the acoustics of a space, which they said were the number one concern when they interviewed autistic people, the spatial sequencing, whether there was quote unquote escape space, as well as compartmentalization of different spaces in the home, transition zones, what they called sensory zoning, and safety. So those are various ways in which you might also be thinking about the design aspect of a space. But again, folks are not often asked what they want their spaces to look like, and the additional challenge can be of how to figure this out for folks who have limited communication ability. So that's what they wanted to do here. They said, although the participants in this study were still vocal verbal, they would like to, one of the caveats is they would like to see this extended to other populations, but they thought that by presenting the questions that they had regarding space design using a visual format, they could sort of help to get at the communication difficulties component here. So their goal was to develop what they called individualized mood boards for 8 autistic adults who ranged in age from 17 to 30. This whole thing was really hypothetical, so they didn't have the chance to then actually design them all a space, which would be very cool if they could get that type of money, of course, to do that.
Virtually using the CAD software.
That's a great idea.
Stuff,
maybe
right?
that someone should do that, right?
Get an architect. They have all that software. They do the 3D house or the Sims. You can do it in the Sims.
Yeah, this was mostly about color and texture. I'll let you know. But
texture's a little hard.
Leave a lot of remaining questions out there. So they wanted to try to figure out, hypothetically what folks prefer, just to see, are there similarities across different people, and or did they just feel like this was a good tool to use? So they focused on, like I said, color, soft surfaces, and hard surfaces. The people I had talked about previously in their research had noted that they had found that neutral, naturally occurring, and low arousal colors were thought to be better. But, really this could vary person to person. But they based the ones that they selected for this study on Dalkey et al., who had chosen 20 kind of neutral colors. And here they went with the ones that had been most highly selected, which were grays, greens, blues, and browns. They picked 10 of those to like start things off from. So they had different boards, and the paint ones just had like paint samples right on them basically, and they were like on like cardboard squares. But then they also had 12 soft textiles all on a board, like actual pieces, right? Like carpet square kind of pieces, but they were all different materials, including rough, smooth, transparent, shiny, textured, and patterned. And then they also, same thing, but on 2 different boards, they had 24 hard surface samples, including various woods, various tiles, countertop materials, all sorts of things. They had a good time at Home Depot, I think, getting samples for this. So the way that this worked, it was an interview style research. Everyone, either they did the interview in their own home or they came to the researcher's home, which is unusual, but that was how it worked. And most folks had a support person with them, either a parent or a support like aide. And they took about an hour. They went through the different samples. Everyone got a chance to touch them, ask questions about them, talk through how they might be in their home, and then select as many of them as they wanted to go onto their own mood board. And then they gave us pictures of them, but the pictures are black and white. So like that didn't help us much. I'd love to see that in color, right? And then they had a follow-up survey to round it out. 7 out of 8 people did the follow-up survey. They said they all liked the activity. They thought it was helpful. If anything, they wanted more samples to pick from. And then one person really wanted bright colors rather than the muted colors. So just to note, not everybody is the same, right? We should not assume that everyone's the same. But of the choices presented, they did say that there were some clear winners. There was like a yellowy cream color that was very popular, a duck egg blue color, and a soft mint color that was popular. Ooh. However, despite that one person who thought everything was too bright, several of the other participants said that everything was... Wait, what did I just say?
It was too bright.
Despite the one person that wanted more bright colors, several other participants said that even the ones that were the neutrals that were presented were too bright, and they just wanted plain white. And that wasn't a choice. And then for soft materials, there was a really pretty textured fabric and a figured leather. It looked like fish scales. It was cool. Those were very popular. I would have also picked that leather one. And then for the hard ones, I mean, again, like these are just people's preferences, right? But they liked the wood, they liked the mosaic tile, etc. I don't think we are expected to take like vast generalities from it, but more so just point out that this is a cool way to assess people's preference and how important it is that we include people in this decision-making process. They also said, think about the lighting, how that can affect things, and the practicality of the materials too. So there were some really beautiful materials, but people did mention that they were worried that they could get dirty and would be hard to clean and stuff like that. So the moral of the story is include people in the decision-making process, think about this decision-making process, and recognize that we should I'd love to already have at the ready, right? Like some type of assessment or preference process for people who may have more limited communication abilities to be able to contribute here. So there is a lot of potential work to be done in this area to ensure that everyone has a voice. You might not think that interior design is important, but it really is.
There was totally a Freakonomics where I feel like it was companies whose sole job it is to do stagings, house stagings for real estate.
Yeah.
I feel like you could pair with somebody who's got like warehouses upon warehouses of different like couches and chairs and pillows and things, and probably do staging for individuals, autistic individuals this way. Now, for the ones who aren't able to sort of just do the mood board, right? Who would need to actually be able to experience, do they go near some of the areas? Do they get to stay? Do they like being in those areas, right? Although I'm guessing it would then be one of those services that it's like, oh, what a great idea. It costs so very much money.
Yeah.
So only people who are very, very rich are able to do this for their children. But that idea of these things exist. So the idea of how would you set up these environments? It's not impossible because there are people whose job it is to just be able to have all the furniture that you would want to try out in a space at any time. Like that does exist.
I like that idea. Or virtual reality.
Virtual reality, definitely. You lose the proprioceptive feedback.
That is very true.
Because you could do dynamic lighting and stuff, though.
All right, that's it.
Whew.
It's all area
Diana,
for future research.
that sounds great. All right. Well, we've made it through. We made it through the city, and we're
That's
here
right. I fought him off with my fabric samples.
at the base of Mount Dan or Mount Doom. We're here. So, Alan, please. We're all getting very tired. We can't hold these articles any longer. You've got to get us to the top.
Okay, well, let's slog through this like it's the Fields of Mordor, because I like this article, but it is from 1993 and it is very classic behavioral research. It's classroom management strategies. Are they setting events for coercion? By Shores, Gunter, and Jack. I chose this mostly because I was trained in schools, and this brought to mind a lot of that intensive coaching I was given about make sure you have rules and use a token economy and all this stuff. But then and also make sure you have a lot of positive statements toward your kiddos, but whatever, systems first, environmental engineering. So yeah, in this article, it builds on research from Patterson and Reed from the Oregon Social Learning Center, targeting students with severe behavior disorder. That work from Patterson and Reed is about coercion theory and about how, coercive cycles of interactions leads to worsening of behavior, as opposed to positive interactions, which we all know and hear about, but I feel like we still need to be hearing about it. So this was just because it's a summary of 20 to 30 years of research before them, and we can look back 30 years later and be like, wow, we've come so far. Yeah. So the first portion of this, they talk about the dyad of parents and children, the reciprocal / coercive interaction hypothesis, go into lots of detail, which I think that we as behaviorists don't go over this as much as we should, because they refer to articles by Sidman and Skinner and in the 80s talking about the coercive nature of schools. Yeah. And I wasn't really aware that occurred. And yeah, basically Sidman and Skinner and a lot of behaviorists at the time were yeah, schools are horrible places for children to be, because they are just do as you're told, do as I say, not as I do kind of approaches, especially at the time. And so, thinking about probably lots of coercive interactions and what can we apply from caregiver research to this field. Let's look. They then go into sort of the research on teacher-student interactions, which they say there's not a lot of research even at this point. And looking back, there's still not a lot, 100 articles, maybe in 30 years that I could find that cite this and similar things.
It's not a lot.
It's not a lot.
There was an article recent. I'm trying to find it now. There was a recent article. I can't remember what journal, looking at just teaching teachers using, I think it was self-monitoring, to say more praise statements, which I've shared with teachers. And some of them are this is so fascinating, I don't think about this enough. And others are I don't need this. So it's hit or miss.
Thank you for spoiling the suggestions for research and application.
No. But I don't remember what article it is, Alan. So,
that's fine.
I might have made that up just now.
But, it's funny. Even at the time, all the studies basically showed that there are very, very low rates of positive interactions between teachers and students. But, they also very clear, if a teacher has 10 students, you would have to be one statement a second if you wanted to be giving them all an individual attention. So
good job,
great job, wonderful.
You need novel statements too. You can't just good job, everybody.
And specific.
Yep.
And specific. The next session is just teacher disapproval, and basically talk about how high rates of reprimands are seen throughout the school system. Reprimands, there's a lot of research that even shows that, a reprimand, that they're often effective for students that don't have severe behavioral disorders. And so you're disruptive, and you almost start to create some interesting contrast, because if you're reprimanding the student with behaviors and then everyone else stops engaging in disruptive behaviors, then that student, by being reprimanded, one, they're not going to change their behavior, but they will be much more comparatively disruptive than their peers are, who are sort of zoning out and not wanting to like receive the attention that their classmate is getting. But, even in the 70s, talking about positive verbal behavior is like essential, that when teachers switch from a negative to a positive ratio of positive verbal statements, like they did that after doing just a course on using behavioral principles. And it was like universally those, like their interactions in the classroom went better. So we've known for almost 60 years that this is essential. And then, so then they go into thinking about, so they use this coercion, then we get to the sort of the crux of the article. They use this idea of coercion theory and coercive interactions to say, well, what antecedent or consequent strategies commonly used, can these be setting events for some of these behaviors? And what I think is funny is because they don't really mention CMOs in this, but it's like, this could be redone now, and you could really be talking about like especially the reflexive.
Yeah.
And
there's a great Carbone article that we talked about a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah. But, basically they talk about rules, especially whether or not they're made as to do statements or don't do statements, obviously better but even like well-made rules that are do this, observable, like good rules in place. Could these be setting events to coercive behavior? Well, at the very least, they don't help prevent coercive behavior, and they don't seem to have positive outcomes. So it's neutral, very likely will have the unintended effect of, now you have these clearly stated rules, we're only going to talk about them when they're broken, not when they're observed. Right. If we think about teachers engaging in reprimands, now we have clear, specific sources of reprimand going on. Then classroom arrangement, basically, I think this is funny now because it talks about more space between the students is better, but how, that's probably not feasible in most schools, and how
they're in there like a traffic jam.
Yeah.
Bumper to bumper.
Hold on. I'm thinking
Nice,
of
Diana.
COVID-19 school setups. I feel like they got pretty creative with how to keep everyone distant from one another.
It's a double-decker situation. You got to go up.
Oh, okay. No. They found space. So I think if schools did want to go back to that model, although now it's associated with pandemic, so I don't know how many teachers are like, I remember that pandemic setup I had.
Right.
Really enjoyed that period of my life.
Well, and what's interesting about like this section is like, again, we don't see this as being particularly helpful. What the research shows is that the greater distance, the students aren't necessarily distracting each other, or they don't seem to be as a relevant part of the environment to each other. Like they're far enough away that the behaviors don't influence, each student's behaviors doesn't fit the others. It also makes it easier for the teacher to see everybody, but also focus on one individual at a time as opposed to one individual in a group. But again, likely neutral, doesn't have positive outcomes. Then they talk about movement patterns. Movement patterns, very important, which again, Rob and I, being in schools, hear this all the time. Proximity, you got to move around, provide attention. However, does not necessarily help because you're moving, and then if you're not making those positive statements, then your presence makes it easier to provide those reprimands. So again, not adequate to prevent coercion, and probably gives teachers the opportunity to see and single out people because they are moving around the room more, if they are more prone to making reprimanding coercive statements. And then finally, reinforcement system, using the token economy. Only helpful if you're constantly pointing out desirable behaviors rather than using them as a threat of, if you keep doing that, I'm not going to give you
the
reinforcer. Yep. And sometimes the tangible, exchangeable item may not be valuable to that student. So again, all the things that we know. Interestingly, Iwata's research in the 70s showed that when teachers did have this system, it did lead them to be making more positive statements, at least initially. Didn't have some longitudinal data on that. So At least it's like the idea of reinforcement and positive reinforcement had the most clear outcome and effect on, but could still lead to some coercion. So thinking about this, and this is just they're theorizing and looking at the research and saying, we think that these common strategies could lead to coercion. Do they? Here's a framework to do some follow-up research. But then they see that these are a problem. How do you increase positive interactions? This is, again, 93, but they recommend using audio and videotapes, self-monitoring, also constantly coaching the teachers and making sure that they're not feeling like strain as much as possible, and that they're that they don't feel that it's important that they feel that they can handle what's going on in their classroom. And if they don't, then these systems aren't going to be implemented correctly and aren't going to work. And especially, like, make sure there's no response costs in the token system unless it's individualized for a specific person after a lot of, not saying you can't do it, but you shouldn't do it to a group contingency. It just does not work.
Yep. Quick for people to slip that in those systems, right? It's, well, because we know, right, from Sidman and other people that punishment just works so quickly and so effectively that people will, gravitate toward it without even realizing it, or without realizing that response cost is punishment. So you'll end up with token economies with response costs built in without realizing that you've now moved it over to being a coercive system.
Mm-hmm. And and exactly. And it also means that if you don't, ultimately you're not telling people, these systems do not tell and remind the teacher to do what they need to do. They only tell the teacher how to respond to things. And then, unfortunately, again, they just say, make more positive statements. Man, there is so little literature that we have on like what a good positive statement is. That's always my big thing. They, Patterson and Reed, they contributed to like parent management training back in the day. I think even now, we see it in all of the systems that are the big names that we have in ABA now. We talk about like therapeutic narration and all of this stuff, but we don't actually tell people what to say to kids. Even just like responding to one of like a communication bid can be a positive interaction if you're outgoing about it, or you find a way to show that you value that interaction with the student and be responsive to them. But yeah, there's just a dearth.
You can say something positive in such a way that it is so aversive.
Yeah, exactly. Well, or right, yes, like
it's like my whole life,
right? It's like the Kids in the Hall sketch, Rob.
I really want to be your friend.
There he goes.
And then to sort of what to summarize, they say, Sidman and Skinner both say that we cannot remove aversive events, coercive events from all parts of life, especially not schools. Like that whole idea of mandatory school, though meant to help people, is kind of the beginning of a coercive relationship, and that you don't have a choice to be there to some extent. Yeah, and basically say that I love this line. The position of the authors is that coercive interactions between teachers and students with severe behavior disorders should be decreased and positive reciprocal reactions increased. I'm like, bravo, we've done it.
Just talking off the cuff here, right?
Yeah. Okay.
I had never read this article before.
No.
Yeah, and they do point you toward the research in the last line, which is these systems can increase the power of coercive events, but it is the behavior of the teacher that dictates which it will be. And so helping teachers or caregivers in childcare, or I really think about the interactions I have coaching like new behavior technicians of like, yeah, I know that like that you want to like make them work for this, but they're not ready for that. Like, let's just, they engage in a little bit of behavior. We'll just like respond and model the appropriate behavior. Don't take the thing away from them just because they made a mess. That's not going to help us, especially day 3 of our interactions with like a new client.
Yeah. So to bring yours and Rob's articles together, it's not the teacher's fault, but it is all up to them.
Yeah.
Fun. Isn't that fun to hear? Okay.
We did it.
I found it.
I found the.
I'm sorry, Alan. The article and your discussion was. I knew there was a very specific and very recent article on behavior specific praise and teaching behavior specific praise, and I could not find it for the life of me. But I done it.
Ask me. I have it. We're replicating it as one of my student theses in 2023.
Which one is it?
I can't remember right now. No,
No,
it's an article by, I think, Gando et al. I can send it to you. It's in Behavior Interventions.
Okay, the one I'm thinking of is Justice et al. 2023, which I didn't write a reference because it was for a training that I did for teachers, and now
you should put it in Google Scholar.
I can't find it, and we can all listen. Well, I'll find it at some point. But it was on increasing behavior specific praise related to self-monitoring, which I know there have been other articles too, but it was a very recent one, like a 2023 one. And it was a little funny to think of.
It's BAP, Justice, Hott, and Heiniger.
Yes, thank you. Using self-monitoring to increase behavior-specific praise in elementary classrooms. But yeah, that idea, I mean, I totally hear you on that idea, Alan. It's really easy, but I don't think about it very often in terms of, I'm like, these systems work. There's so much research to support them. But I really do want to double down on, I need to make sure that I'm not just giving teachers, almost like giving them permission of like, these are the things you should be mad at all the time when the kids aren't doing them. Is that all I do? If I'm like, here's a great system and the good behavior games has so much research to support it, if I don't then also make sure that we keep up the rates of praise for the appropriate behavior. Just again, anecdotally, more teachers when I've worked on consulting classroom management systems, they like the systems where they are only saying positive things. So even though I'll often lay out like the original good behavior game was about when kids in groups are breaking rules, you make the mark on the board and the goal is to get less than that. That was the original one. But you could do it the other way, where at certain amounts of time, you have to remember to tell the groups they are doing the right thing. And I think in 100% of, I don't know, like 8 or 9 various groups I've worked with on this in the past, like 2 or 3 years, they always I like that one. I want to make it harder for me because I have to remember to do this thing because I want to tell them that they're all doing a great job. So the will is there. I think it also then is one more thing they have to remember. And so it's a lot about how do we set up systems to help you remember. So it's not on you to then say, whoops, I haven't been giving as much praise. But yeah, it's a good reminder that just because we have systems that have effectiveness in research does not necessarily mean that we know all the components within that package that were required to be effective. Because your good behavior game where you're just yelling at kids all the time, I'm guessing won't be as successful as the one where you're praising the student, if it's successful at all. So very good. But I was a little scared when I first read that title of like, oh no, is everything I've learned about classroom management going to be the worst? And I'm a bad person for all these years. So it was nice to know there was a nuance and a context that was in there. Well, we've made it. We were at the top. We're at the top of Mount Dan. We're going to throw our articles. Everyone, quick, grab your articles. We're going to throw them into the fires, not to burn them because we don't like them, but so that their knowledge is disseminated on the winds throughout the lands. And all right, well, now that we've completed our quest, congratulations, everybody. But we're going to go to Dissemination Station. But we're not taking a train like we usually do.
We don't disseminate.
We don't disseminate with grab bag. We just say goodbye.
Yeah, we're over.
We have no dissemination. We're over an hour now. Nobody wants to hear anything. We need to say goodbye.
I had a fun bit that led to the goodbye.
Every time, Rob. Every time. There's no dissemination. Yeah. This is my first grab bag, but I've listened to enough of them to know there's not.
We want to conclude. We have to conclude.
What do
we do not conclude with grab bag ever. We say good work.
What is the end? What is the end?
We conclude the episode because we're going to be taken by eagles to the end of the episode. Oh, come on. And y'all crapped on that. That was a great bit. You would have wrapped it all up. Shame on you. Shame on everyone for rushing me. Such a good bit. Okay. Well, I'll wrap it up now. And now the Eagles have brought us back to the Shire, where we will say some special thanks to everyone for listening, because we're at the end of a grab bag, and we are going to say thank you all. Well, no, there's a bunch of things. We're going to say thank you all for listening. We have to say thank you for subscribing and following us on all the socials. We want to say we hope you can follow us on our website, abainsidetrack.com, where you can find links to all of the articles that we discussed in this episode, as well as links to all our previous episodes and places to get CEs. You can find more ABA Inside Track on Patreon, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where you can find our listener choice episodes, our book club episodes to hear more Alan. And we actually have one coming out at the end of this month. So if you want to get that, it's on Act Books. So if you want to get on that right when it comes out, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, and you get some CEs for no additional charge. Speaking of CEs, you might want the second secret code word. It is breakfast. BREAKFAST. Breakfast.
Who could have predicted that?
Well, not if they skim to the end and just try to get the second code word. Then you just be like, breakfast. Oh, what's the other one? Is it lunch? It's not. It's not lunch. Is it a different meal time? Try it. See what happens. It's breakfast is this one, though. And you should listen because this episode's gold, baby. It's all gold. Oh, boy. And that's our second secret code word. Some final special thanks. Thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit, Mount Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors, for his amazing editing work. And, of course, our special guest on this special epic episode. It was all filmed in New Zealand. Alan Haberman. Thank you for joining us, Alan.
Glad to be here.
We'll be back next week with another fun-filled, perhaps less adventuresome episode, but it'll still be great next week. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.